Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Uncomplicating HR. My name, your host, Mindy Flanagan, Chief Inspiration Officer for Inspiring HR. And today I am joined by the fabulous Jennifer Archer, our HR Services Manager. She and I have worked together since 2011. Yes, Inspiring HR was just the two of us way back when, and now it's, I think, 11, not including subcontractors for marketing and IT and stuff like that. So welcome, Jennifer. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Mindy.
You're welcome.
I'm looking forward to joining you this afternoon and talking about our nonprofit community.
Yeah, so one of the things we're going to be touching on today in terms of our primary lane of services and how we service specific clients is we're going to be talking about HR for nonprofits. Before we dive into that, why don't you give the audience a flavor of who you are and what your background is, and I don't know, maybe a little juicy nugget of your journey with Inspiring HR from 2011 to present. What would you say is the most different in your life? So the floor is yours.
Well, okay. Well, thank you. So I'm Jennifer Archer. I currently reside in Spokane, Washington. I'm very blessed to work for an organization that knows how to make remote work. So I lived in Richmond, Virginia until 4 years ago, and worked with Inspiring HR for the last 14 years. But when the outdoors called 4 years ago and my husband and I decided to relocate to Spokane, Washington, I was lucky enough to be able to keep my position with Inspiring HR. Now, as Mindy said, I was her first hire, and now we're a team of 11. We've got 4 folks reporting to Mindy, 5 folks reporting to me, and 1 part-time person. So yeah, it's been a great journey. I love being in a leadership role with Inspiring HR. I love also being able to continue to work with our client community. And, juicy nuggets about me, I don't know, not so juicy, but I do love the outdoors. I love hiking, camping, not so much on the backpacking. I don't want to carry everything I own on my back. But other than that, anything that's outdoorsy, I'm all up for, and really enjoy where I live now. So it gives me the opportunity to explore new places.
Well, I love the outdoors, but I am not sleeping on the ground anymore. That is a non-starter for me. I gave that up after college. There's no more ground sleeping with me. So,
well, that's the nice thing about having a camper van. Is
yes,
you can get to a lot of the places, and you still got a bed to sleep in.
Yeah, I would agree. But my husband just joked with me that for me, the Holiday Inn Express now seems like camping to me. So it's interesting what our preferences become as we age, and you have some good fortunes come your way. So we have a few members of our client community that have been with us a long time. And some of these, you might not even be the primary HR consultant, but you've got good context of their history with us, their journey with us. And since we really want to focus on some helpful tips for nonprofits considering outside HR support help, I thought it would be helpful to gain from your perspective some storytelling around some of the wins we've had with members of our client community that are in the nonprofit space. And I know we've worked with some of all sizes. We've got some nonprofits that are, just 5 employees in Virginia. I don't know if we have nonprofits that have a distributed team, but one of the nonprofits I'm thinking of, it's close to 100 employees, if not more. I think they've been with us all the way back in 2012. But can you tell everybody who's listening, if you're a nonprofit and you're either considering outside HR support help, or you're getting HR support maybe from your payroll company, but it's not quite what you had hoped. Tell everybody a little bit about your experience with our nonprofits and what might be helpful tips.
Absolutely. Well, I would say the first thing is that we recognize that the mission of a nonprofit is a little different from a lot of for-profit organizations, and we really focus in on the mission of the nonprofit and how we can support that mission through the work that we do with them on culture, on succession planning, on performance management on a day-to-day basis. But to think of a couple of the nonprofits that we work with on a longer-term basis, it varies depending on how involved their board is and how they evolve over time. One in particular that I'm thinking of, when we first started working with them, they were one of the first clients that you and I went on site with in my journey with Inspiring HR. Yep. And there was board involvement, there was CEO involvement, there was the executive team involvement. And over time, as the internal structures have matured, we've had less interaction with the board by design than we have had with the internal stakeholders. But it's been an interesting journey. We started out, we did a pretty comprehensive HR needs evaluation and kind of laid a roadmap with an HR service plan over the years that we would implement. Being a nonprofit, they do have a lot of stakeholders that you need to gain buy-in at every level of the organization from. So doing interviews internally with some of the staff members when we were looking at performance management, how can we support them on some of their licensing requirements around, I think it's called supervision. We've worked with them on that. And then just having that long-term game plan based on the interviews with the initial stakeholders, and then evolving that over the years as their existing CEO was starting to look towards retirement. What does that succession plan look like? Do we have internal candidates? Do we have external candidates? How do we make that decision? How do we prepare for that transition, both from a skills perspective, knowledge perspective, and an organizational readiness perspective? So there's been a lot of work that we've done with different nonprofits, this one in particular that I'm thinking of, even as they've changed some of the organizations they've collaborated with other partners, helping them navigate those change management processes so that they are able to really see the results of the change that they were trying to execute throughout the organization. And then as any organization grows, doing that leadership development, taking those individual contributors and upskilling them to step into leadership positions versus just chucking them into the deep end of the pool and seeing how they swim. That's been something we've worked with this particular organization on as well, and I think that's really paid some dividends over the years.
Do you recall in any of our nonprofit clients, were they any of them in growth mode? They came to us with almost nothing in terms of their people ops systems and processes, and we sort of created from the ground up. Can you recall what that looked like with any of them?
Yeah, I think there have been some that we have had that this one was because, again, they did have some foundation, but that was mostly based on their licensing requirements. So they didn't really have the structure in place for some of the recruiting that they needed to do and being able to quickly identify talent within the community, how to go about executing those recruiting processes. So we've been able to help them with that. We also have other nonprofits that we've kind of taken foundational elements, mission, vision, and really help them develop a more comprehensive employee handbook that speaks to their culture, that's customized to their culture, so that just from the get-go, anyone that reads that document knows what type of a place that is to work, and making sure that those core values shine through in all of their policies.
Yeah, what's interesting is I remember a while ago, and this is when I was the HR consultant, but you helped me with this one. I remember it was one of our child care services nonprofits. I don't remember which one, but I remember when the new executive director came in, they were finally convinced to do a new employee handbook because the new executive director was brought in, and her first epiphany of misalignment was, how can we provide the services we provide and not grant paid maternity leave that includes paid leave for adoption for our own employees? It's sort of what we do. We inwardly, are we an authentic organization we have core values that are at the basis of how we deliver service, but those core values are also applied internally to an organization and are ingrained in our culture. It was sort of like that same epiphany with her where she's like, just that little like kind of miss in terms of employee benefits. Are we in a staffing and cash position to start to be true to who we are as a service provider and provide paid adoption leave for our employees? And I think at the time they were only 22 employees, but that I felt like that was really important to her. And I know she ran it by the board, but it's like I have those epiphanies where executive directors really want to get creative with a handbook or within their policies and practices, and they see a misalignment between what we do as a provider versus the benefits and work environment we provide to our employees. Have you had similar epiphanies with the executive directors you've worked with?
Yeah, both with executive directors and with the senior staff of some nonprofits. I think that it's really important to reflect the values of the organization, as I've said, and what type of culture they're trying to create. And I know this is an area where you and I have had some differing opinions over the years. Being now in the western part of the country, I do find that some of my clients are embracing different concepts, even in the nonprofit community, than some of the clients that I've worked with in the East. And I think that's one of the things that makes us great, in my opinion, is that we recognize that that's okay. Like, we can have differences and we can still modify our policies to reflect what the organization wants their culture to be. Collaborating with the executive directors is really a great place to get there, but doing stakeholder interviews is also really important, because the executive director, they may not be touching every person in the organization, have that messaging on a regular basis, whereas those supervisors, those directors within the organization, they're really the ones that set the tone within their scope of responsibility. So making sure that the messaging is consistent from top to bottom, and conveying the importance of that is really key to ensuring that you've got the vision, the culture carrying throughout, particularly for our larger nonprofits.
Trickle down. It affects everything. Everything trickles down.
Absolutely.
It's interesting you bring up the point of the stakeholders, because I'd say that's a similarity that in terms of what we prescribe for nonprofits, but also for-profits. And I know we chuckle sometimes at this, the business owner, like the executive director in a way, pulling out their hair, trying to write job descriptions off the top of their head. And we're more like, why aren't we talking to the hiring manager and the person who did that job, instead of you just trying to create something from, it's either a blank sheet of paper or you're going to take a shot at prompting AI. But either way, the key people that are involved in filling that position, holding the person accountable, or the person that actually used to do the job or is currently in the job, are your best sources of information for creating that job description.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I think that's a little bit different for many nonprofits is when we speak of stakeholders, I mean, there are many. There's the community, there's the board of directors, there's the executive director, there's the leadership team, there's the employees, there's partners. Many times nonprofits have more partners that they work with or collaborate with within the community. There's a lot of networking that goes on in the nonprofit space, and that's really important to recognize, that their stakeholders are not just, in a typical company, their own internal employee population and customer base. But the board really is so important, and the most important thing I think a board for a nonprofit can do is make sure that they've got their governance documents outlined clearly, because who's accountable for what, who has decision-making authority in which areas, what needs board approval, what doesn't need board approval. If you don't have that clearly outlined, that can really undermine the success, the ability of that nonprofit to navigate effectively within their community and within their mission. So making sure you've got great governance documents is really important.
Oh, that's such a good point. I didn't even think about that. When I volunteered to be on the board with the Chesterfield Chamber of Commerce, the first thing they said was, will you be the head of the personnel committee? And I said, yeah, but I'm not going to call it personnel unless we're somehow, going back to the 1980s. And so but that's kind of what I was dealing with, some of that we used to work this way thinking. And I'm like, hey, you're going to want to modernize a bit. You're at least going to let me call this committee the HR committee, not the personnel committee. But to your point about the governance, is I've been in these arenas where, yeah, you're right, unintentional gaps can be created, and unnecessary conflict can be created with the uncertainty and the absence of those governance documents.
Or a lack of momentum. I mean, in the situation that you just talked about, like, if you have one person who has a lot of enthusiasm and is willing to say yes, then you can end up shooting yourself in the foot, because that person can't get it all done. A lot of times, if it's a board, it may be a volunteer position, and this person has a whole nother job and a whole nother life. And if you put too much on the plate of one board member, then things stall out, and
Yeah,
that's not
totally true.
effective for the organization.
Totally true. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. When we started this conversation, I didn't even think to bring up board governance, but I think that's a really helpful tip for anybody that's listening, particularly if you're an executive director or somebody on the what would be commonly referred to at the C-suite at the nonprofit, and you're thinking we need help. Maybe it's worth pausing and thinking, where does the board play into all of this, and are we organized enough to be able to make outside help worth it at this juncture of our journey?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I wrote a policy document for one of my nonprofit clients last week, and one of my first questions was, who approves this? Is this board approval or is this executive director approval? So
good question.
Those are all relevant things that we have to know in order to be able to collaborate effectively in the nonprofit sector.
Well, I can tell you, just as we sort of wrap up, that there are a couple times I can think of where somebody called in, sent us an email, called us inquiring about our services. And in both cases, it was a board member. One was a board member worried that based on executive director turnover, their people ops projects had stalled. The job descriptions were getting outdated. The handbook never got out of draft phase. And I think you and I talked about this too. I think they might have been in the middle of a human capital management system change from like UKG to ADP or ADP to Paychex or something. I mean, it's just, they were very worried about these gaps. And then the one that gave me the chuckle that I remember now, we don't work with this particular nonprofit, but at the time I was very welcoming of it when someone from the board called and said, I don't think our executive director is supposed to be fighting our unemployment claims, right? Like, shouldn't somebody else be doing that? And I'm like, yeah, like at the very least they should have an admin assistant that can fill out those forms that go back to the state. So, but sometimes sometimes these executive directors get so wrapped up in the busyness of the role. Sometimes when the board does have really good governance, they have enough bandwidth to step back and say, is that the best use of that executive director's time? What are we missing here in terms of an improvement to internal process? So, well, thank you. This has been really fun. I'm really pleased about the governance suggestion. That was a really good one. Well, I'll just close by saying thank you for your great service. I think everyone can tell how skilled you are at your job just by listening to this somewhat perspective storytelling about our experience with nonprofits. You got one final tip you want to give a potential future executive director who's trying to get their HR house in order? Any good little juicy tip? Where do you start?
Yeah, I think that's the key is, recognizing that there are other HR consulting firms in the world, and having an initial evaluation of what you have in place and what you don't have in place from an HR perspective. That to me is a great starting point. And so anyone in the HR world that says, without even listening first, here's what you need to do, my tip would be run the other way, because that is not necessarily what your organization needs. Listening, collecting information, and making a sound evaluation, that's step one. So anyone who's not willing to do that, maybe isn't the right fit for you.
So true. I mean, we can always speak to during the sales process what's most common in terms of the first project or your first initiative, but what do we always say? Other than me saying no one's transplanting organs around here, we also say not a one of our clients is the same. None of them. And that's why we embrace customization at the level that we do. So thank you so much, Miss Archer. Always lovely spending time with you. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Uncomplicating HR. You will see in this video and also clips that if you want to reach out to us and ask questions, first 45 minutes always free, and you can use our Contact Us form on our website to schedule time with myself or Valerie Juarez. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your day.